Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami, and we talk about the relations between India and Nepal, apparently two friendly countries which are strained these days over a border dispute. Last year, India released an updated map in which Kala Pani particularly was shown as part of its territory, an area that Nepal claims to be its integral part. Nepal reacted strongly against India's move. Recently, India inaugurated the 80-kilometer Lip-Lak road between capital New Delhi and the Kailash Mansarovar, a revered Hindu pilgrimage site in the Tibetan plateau. Nepal's foreign ministry condemned India's unilateral act. Now, Nepal's cabinet has endorsed a new political map showing Lip-Lak, Kalapani and Limpiadura under its territory, which has been rejected by India's Ministry of External Affairs. And to talk about these sovereign relations between India and Nepal over this border dispute in particular, we are joined today at Newswire by Mr. Nishant Varma, who is an analyst, and he's joining us from New Delhi, and Mr. Prakash Rimal, who is an analyst and editor at the Himalayan Times, joining us from Nepal. I'll start the discussion with you, Mr. Rimal. What has actually angered Nepal over the inauguration of the road that was done by India just most recently?
Thank you, Jawad, for having me to this show. You know, part of the problem you have already introduced yourself. The dispute is about a stretch of land, you know, something like 35 kilometers in length, which covers an area of anywhere between 335 and 375 kilometers, square kilometers. You know, that's been a very strategic location for both for India and China. And then now the dispute is between Nepal and India. India claims that part of territory to be its integral part of territory, so does Nepal. We'll have to see it a little bit in historical perspective. It's not just the new map that India issued in 2019 November. It goes a little back. In 2015 May, India and China signed a memorandum of understanding to use, you know, that route as a transit route for trade between India and China, which apparently was not in the notice of Nepal. At that time also, Nepal had sent a strong note of dissent to both the countries. And then they said the issues would be taken up in due course of time at, you know, in bilateral meetings, but it didn't happen. Ever since, Nepal has consistently requested India to, you know, start talking about not just that segment of land, but also other. We have some border issues with India.
So, Mr. Rimal, why do you think India was reluctant? Rather, we have seen statements coming from the officials from Indian side that they wanted this particular dispute to be resolved through negotiations, but you're of the view that India didn't come into negotiations. So why was India reluctant to come into negotiations?
I mean, they have not given any particular reason. But then, you know, of late, India has been maintaining its position that, you know, that is integral territory of India. How can we discuss this with Nepal? Because the land is ours. That's their position. And Nepal's position is, no, that's our territory, you know. But then even when India claims that stretch of land to be India's territory, in 2014, the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi himself, you know, admitted to the fact that it's a disputed territory. At one hand, they say it's a disputed territory, and on the other hand, this is the integral part of territory. If it's integral, how is it disputed? If it's disputed, how is it integral? I mean, that's for the Indian administration to explain. As far as Nepal is concerned, there is no confusion that the stretch of land is ours. It's been historically ours.
Okay, I'll take this point to Mr. Varma. Mr. Varma, what makes India think that this disputed area is part of India rather than of Nepal?
Thanks, Jawad. Primarily, ever since the end of colonial era, the border issues of India with several countries has persisted, this part being one of them. Now, Nepal must understand, and even India should understand, that this is not a border issue which cropped up a few years ago. This goes back into the history as back as 1816, when the Nepalese king lost a certain area to the Britishers at that point in time. Britishers who were on our colonial, who were ruling us in terms of this land. Now, we must understand that these issues of borders have persisted with our neighbors for India, and there is always an amicable result that can be reached upon, and it has to be through dialogue. We have been discussing several issues with our neighbors, including Nepal, as rightly pointed out by Prakash ji. But then what happens is that we forget that border issues cannot be resolved in a jiffy. We must not forget that the land issue has to be resolved through talks. Now, aggression of any sort by Nepal is unwelcome, because aggression shall not solve any border issue.
So, Mr. Varma, what sort of an aggression do you think has been done by Nepal in this particular case?
See, what we have learned is that they have sent their forces towards that area of dispute, as I may call it, let us assume. So there's no point sending your forces, Mr. Nepal, because that is not going to resolve. What shall resolve is a dialogue. When Prakash ji said that India is not ready to talk, I disagree. Let's talk. We've been talking to everybody. We will talk to you also. We still consider, we shall consider you as our brother, Nepal. Remember, the Prime Minister of India, whose fan I am not, gave you $1 billion credit line in 2014. This shows our love for Nepal. So kindly understand that sending forces...
So, Mr. Varma, when you talk about history of this particular dispute, it goes back to 1816. You're of the view that Nepal lost some area at that time to the Britishers. But later on, there was a treaty also, if I'm pronouncing it right, that was a Sagwali Treaty, which has been referred by the Nepalese authorities as well, according to which they claim this particular disputed area to be of their own.
That a disputed land is always claimed by either of the parties. We have border disputes with Pakistan, with Nepal, with Bangladesh, not with Bhutan, and we have border disputes with China also. So just as I said, Jawad earlier, that ever since the end of colonial era, this has persisted across India's border.
So why is that so? Why the border disputes on every front are happening with India? I mean, you have just mentioned with Pakistan, with China, even in this case, with Nepal as well.
Because India has so many countries which are on its border. That is the reason. As I said, colonial era ended. So many countries are attached to Indian borders, including other countries have problems of borders. For example, Pakistan has a problem of borders with Afghanistan. India has a problem with Pakistan in certain areas, with Bangladesh in certain areas, with Nepal in certain areas, and definitely with China. So that's very, very easy to say, difficult to administratively end. Why? Because everybody would like to have the inch of soil it claims to be its own. So Jawad, that's the reason I am with love telling Nepal that they cannot be aggressive on someone's behest. Mark my words. This is very important.
So, Mr. Rimal, as Mr. Varma has said, you've heard him. He's of the view that Nepalese authorities should not portray an aggressive behavior regarding this particular border dispute, because such type of things are to be resolved on the table through negotiations and happen through a time-taking process.
I think it's not, Jawad, I think it's not an aggression. We have to see it in terms of cause and effect. Did Nepal choose to go there, or was Nepal, put in a situation where you would have to react to show its presence felt on the borders? Nepal didn't deploy security forces. India has had its garrisons located there for a very long time. It's just that state of that part of Nepal happened to be a backyard for reasons I cannot explain to you. But then it's not an aggression. If at all it's an aggression, it's provoked. It's provoked by India. I mean, at a time we are fighting as if that was the only priority for India in amidst the COVID pandemic, that India is fighting, so is Nepal. Why did the government of India have to inaugurate a nearly half-built or less than half-built road? What kind of a political message they had to send? And then, something has to change about the Indian narratives also. I mean, this is Nepal's territory, and Nepal, Nepalis are taking up the issue. We are not taking up the issue at the behest of somebody that's apparently meaning, the implied meaning is China. That's an insult on people of conscience like me. I can understand if we are being if we are playing into the hands of Chinese. That's not the point. That's where Indian narrative has to stop. When it comes to and then when we are talking about this historical, cultural, and relationship dating back to centuries, we tend to lump a lot of things together. Mind you, we are talking about this disputed piece of land in far west Nepal, which borders India.
So, Mr. Rimal, why this particular area is of significance for India? And as Mr. Varma has also said, this is, since it is a disputed area, so does India have any right to build a road link through this disputed area without any resolution of the dispute before anything that happens on the ground?
I can only give you a Nepali perspective, because Nepal claims that piece of land to be Nepal's. India does not have any unilateral right to, build the road and inaugurate the road. And then, besides, there have been efforts in the past also to sort out the border issues. The land is apparently very strategically located, both for India and China. One, it's a trade route. Also because, the Kailash Mansarovar, a lot of Indian pilgrims go to this Hindu shrine up there in Tibet, and that's the shortest route for Indian pilgrims to, if they want to do a road trip. Otherwise, they would have to come through Nepal or, take a long route via Tibet. And then the significance is it's a holy pilgrimage site of the Hindus, and trade route also for India and China.
Okay, Mr. Rimal, I'll with this very point to Mr. Varma. Mr. Varma, as you already mentioned that this is since a disputed territory, so does India have any right to build a link from this particular disputed area, whatever the reason might be?
Thank you. I take this opportunity to address Prakash, our Nepalese global brother from a different mother. Prakashji, whatever you said on the program smells of the backing of China to simply oppose for the sake of opposing. And I'll tell you why, sir. You must understand, in 2014, when the Prime Minister of India gave you a credit line of $1 billion, it was out of love and brotherhood. You didn't come up and raise such issues. I remember recently a big medical supply for COVID-19 protection was sent out from India to Nepal. You did not rake up such kind of border issues. I very well know that we lovingly have a large number of Nepalese working in India, earning their bread. We treat them as our brothers. We don't talk about such petty issues at this point in
So,
time.
Mr. Varma, the point taken is you're of the view that India had been helping Nepal on different occasions, but Mr. Rimal is of the view that back in 2015 there was a memorandum of understanding signed between India and China without taking the Nepalese authorities into confidence. What do you have to say about it?
The answer is quite simple, that yes, there is a memorandum of understanding. It has laid down some rules and regulations. My government would not take any step which is not of falling in line with the rules and regulations. If they had taken a wrong step, Nepal would have been crying foul ever since. It's been 5 years now. So now, as rightly being pointed out, that in the pandemic era, why is this coming up? Okay, so in pandemic era, there are loads of other things happening, but normal administrative work shall not stop. And I only request Nepal not to ever fall in line behest of China.
Okay, Mr. Nishant Varma, thank you very much for your time. Analyst joining us from New Delhi. We really appreciate that. And Mr. Prakash, Rimal, analyst and editor at the Himalayan Times, joined us from Nepal. With this, we come to the end of the first segment. In the second segment, we'll discuss the plight of the Kashmiris and the rise of Hindutva in India. But after a short break, stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Newswire. I'm Jawad Tehami. Ever since India stripped the occupied Jammu and Kashmir from its autonomy by revoking Article 370 of its constitution, 8 million people in the valley have been living under a brutal curfew and complete communication blackout. From the last 296 days till now, innocent Kashmiris have lived under India's brutal oppression and state terrorism. Many have been tortured and killed. Draconian laws like Public Safety Act and Unlawful Activities Prevention Act have made life in the scenic valley a living nightmare. Life of journalists has been made miserable through harassment, intimidation, and no internet facility. Lack of medical and essential supplies worsened the situation even further during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, India has introduced a domicile law as well to change the demography of this disputed area, which is recognized internationally. Not only this, within India itself, the minorities, including Muslims, Christians, and Dalits, are being marginalized. Citizenship Amendment Bill and National Register of Citizens are the glaring examples of this. The rampant attacks against these communities by Hindutva Brigade have exposed the so-called secular image of the contemporary India under the BJP-led government. So does the international community understand the severity of the situation, which could lead to a major catastrophe, as continuously warned by Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan? To talk about this, we are joined today at Newswire by Mr. Ravi Srivastav, who is an analyst. He is joining us from Mumbai, and Mr. Syed Manzoor Shah, who is the member of All Parties Hurriyat Conference, who is joining us from Islamabad. Thank you, both of you gentlemen, for your time at Newswire. I'll begin the discussion with you, Mr. Shah, particularly when we talk about the festivities like Eid. And this time around, the Eid for the Kashmiris is not like the previous Eids, although they have been under brutal subjugation for the last 72 years. But this particular Eid happens to be very different from the previous ones. So what do you have to say about it?
Kashmiris have no chance to celebrate Eid. They have been deprived of these festivities. You can see 2 days before, when brutal Indian army used the brute force in the Navakadal and demolished the 17 houses and looted everything, the ornaments and the valuables and cash, and their houses have been razed to the ground. Now you can see how Kashmiri nation will celebrate an Eid. They are in COVID-19 arrestment, and they are in military siege from last 9 months. No activity of the life is allowed there in Kashmir. How can they celebrate Eid? They are in a mere lockdown and in a mere war. Indian army has waged a war against the civilians. You can see they label our freedom workers, and they say they are the terrorists when they have no weapons, they have no training, and they have no art of killing or art of the fighting.
Okay, Mr. Srivastav, the number of steps which have been taken by the BJP-led government in India, particularly vis-a-vis Kashmir, so most of them happen to be in contravention of the international humanitarian law or any treaties which have been signed between Pakistan and India regarding this particular dispute, or any sort of Security Council resolution regarding this disputed territory. Where do you see this whole saga heading?
Situation is indeed very bad in Kashmir. It's 9 months of lockdown. First 6 months were for that Article 370, and subsequently it is because of coronavirus pandemic, which is prevailing in India at the moment. I hope you are aware that prior to this coronavirus, there was very strong movement inside the country against that CAA Act, NRC, and all these draconian laws which are being brought by the government of India. I fully empathize with my Kashmiri brethren who are living in a hell almost because of these conditions, because of no internet, no mobility, no communication, which is not a good sign for a civilization, for a civilized country as such. And my friend who mentioned about the recent attack on the houses of some 15 houses, 17 houses have been razed, and a lot of damage to the property and the human being. It is absolutely undesirable. There have been more than 80 attacks, 80 infiltrators who have made the terrorist attacks in last 9 months. My question to the government of India is that what did you achieve by removing that Article 370, and what has gone different in Kashmir? Even at that time, I was asking, if you say that the Kashmir will be prospering, the life in Kashmir will be great with the removal of Article 370, the basic Kashmiris would have been dancing on the streets of Srinagar, and instead their life has become now miserable. And what government
that very much proves the fact that the prosperity development can't come with a continuous curfew and complete communication blackout.
You are absolutely right. And this shows that somewhere something is seriously wrong in the implementation or removal of the Article 370 or 35A. There should have been a dialogue. There should have been a peace process. At this moment, I think the basic need is to talk to everyone and ensure that the peace returns to valley, because the students' full 1 year has been lost for the studies, the school, colleges, hospital, nothing is working. The sick are not getting the medicines, they are not getting the treatment. I don't know that what kind of country we are living in. I really feel very empathetic towards my friends there, and this situation should normalize as soon as possible. This is what my demand is to government of India.
Okay, Mr. Shah, talk about this territory in particular. Internationally, it is recognized as a disputed area. But recently, Indian government has brought in a domicile law that is clearly aimed at changing the demography of this occupied territory. Isn't it in direct contravention to the international law? And is there anything the international community can do to stop India from doing this?
International community has a responsibility, and the UN Security Council has a moral and legal obligations to stop India unilateral changes in the Kashmir. They have entirely violated the UN Security Council resolutions and bilateral agreements with Pakistan. when you say it is an internationally recognized the issue and the area, how can India change the demography and how can India change its social and its political fabric? It is entirely in the contrary to the international law and the Geneva Convention. So UN Security Council has to come and to intervene in Kashmir, and under the Article 7, they have rights to prevent India and impose the embargoes on the Indian government.
Okay, Mr. Srivastav, when we talk about the image of the secular India, the principles of which were based on the Gandhian and Nehruvian ideologies, which are in stark contrast to what exactly is happening on the ground, which is being manifested by the Hindutva Brigade and RSS and the BJP-led government in India. As we have discussed already in our couple of programs, that the way the Citizenship Amendment Act and the National Register of Citizens have been protested against by the people over there in large numbers. So, I mean, where is India heading with all its international image of that secularism, or which was based on the Gandhian and the Nehruvian ideologies?
Tehami, I would not say that the 6 years before Kashmir was absolutely peaceful and it was whatever was happening was in the right direction. But I would say that in last 6 years, there is a concerted effort by the ruling dispensation to create the atmosphere of threat, intimidation, suppression in the valley. And that has resulted, that's the agenda on which this government led by the BJP, which is an offshoot of RSS, to have a Hindu-Muslim divide across the country. Now this divide has become not alone Hindu and Muslim. This has become Hindus versus others. Maybe Dalits, maybe Christians, maybe Muslims, or maybe any other community for that matter. So this is what is happening across the nation. The CAA, NRC, NPR was protested. The government was to start with the National Population Register from 1st April 2020, which has been deferred indefinitely. It is not happening anymore. The country is fighting with Corona at the moment. I don't know that what after the Corona pandemic subsides, after that again the government may try to revive their agenda of CAA, NRC, NPR. But this is certain that they are trying to divide the nation vertically on the communal bias. And that is very dangerous for any country, because India had a pride of being a secular nation across the world. And they had maintained their secularism right from the independence till as late as 2013, when this RSS or BJP-led government took over and that Hindutva Brigade came into power. So I don't think that this kind of a divisive politics will survive in India, and ultimately the government will have to see to it that this problem of Kashmir or for that matter all these new laws which they are trying to impose upon the people are withdrawn and the peace is restored in the country.
So, Mr. Srivastav, you already mentioned that it's basically the division which is being tried by the BJP-led government, which is an offshoot of RSS, to create in the Indian society. And it has actually become the situation where there are Hindus versus the others. So it is very much in what we saw, what Adolf Hitler did back in Germany, the supremacy of a certain race. That is what exactly we are seeing. That is exactly what you have just said. So where will India end with if this particular divide goes on to deepen further in the society?
If you browse through the social media, the Twitter, the Facebook, the other Instagram and all those social media platforms, you will find that our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, is considered almost akin to the Adolf Hitler for that matter, because he is an equally autocratic and suppressive and does not bother about the sane voices for different reasons. They are the right-wingers only those states prosper, only those states are supported. The opposition-ruled states are run down. The opposition-ruled states are not given that adequate grant or support from the center. The cooperative federalism has been thrown to winds. So those kind of problems are arising out of it. And we appeal that Mr. Narendra Modi takes into account what is the prevailing situation in the country, what kind of problems we are facing. The day when I'm talking to you, you will be surprised to note that lakhs of Indians are moving. Many are barefooted on the streets, on the highways of this country. They are migrating from their places to their hometowns, and they are not getting the proper support from the government for transportation. So they are bound to move on the foot. They are traveling hungry, thirsty, and they have no support from the government for taking them to their homes. This is the situation in India at the moment.
Mr. Srivastav, as you just said, a lot of voices which are being raised on social media platforms in which Narendra Modi is being correlated to Adolf Hitler. But when we go back into history, the madness or that attitude towards the others by Adolf Hitler led into one of the worst catastrophes the humankind has ever seen on this planet in the form of World War II. Here we see Narendra Modi following the footsteps of Adolf Hitler. So that is what exactly Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was alluding to right from the start, that this Hindu supremacist ideology can lead into a major catastrophe in this particular region as well.
You are absolutely right. I am not predicting any war for that reason, but I would definitely tell you that this is creating a great amount of social unrest in the country. And it's almost, the situation is on the boil, and you are witnessing it. It is manifesting into so many ways. The public frustration, the depression, the stress they are facing because of this. This is being exhibited in many forms of protests and many kind of opposition.
Your resentment is being manifested all across India in different protests which are going on against this rise of Hindutva. Mr. Shah, when we talk about this particular ideology, the Hindutva, not only because of this, the Kashmiris are suffering and languishing in an open prison from last 296 days. The protests are happening within India itself against the high-handedness of BJP-led government.
Yeah. Hindutva means the rule of the fascism. And as you mentioned that this is type of they have conceived this idea from the Adolf Hitler, and this is a Nazism that has been rejected by the history. And Kashmiris and Hindu people have been living since hundreds of years with calm and with the peace, with each other, with love. But this Hindutva ideology has created rifts between the even between Indian people, even between the Hindu majoritarians and even the minorities. Now the BJP has claimed that up to the 2024 they will make the minority less India, and they will make the Kashmiris in minority in their own land. That is a grave situation that world has to address. Otherwise, this will be the regional threat to the peace, and if the peace is jeopardized here in this region, then nobody will sustain either that would be Muslim, or that would be Hindu, or that would be any other minority
Point well
India.
taken. Mr. Syed Shah, member, All Party Studio Conference, joined us from Islamabad. Thank you for your time at Newswire. And Mr. Ravi Srivastav, analyst, joining us from Mumbai. Thank you for your time at Newswire as well. With this, we come to the end of today's Newswire. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Till then, take good care.